The Crazy Neighbor, a Halloween horror story, written by me, Violet's Audios. This story takes place in October of 2005. I just flew in from Berlin, Germany, as I was there for a business trip with a company whose name I won't say for private reasons. I got a phone call from my mother asking me to watch the house for 3 days, as she and my grandmother were going to the city, as my grandmother was getting a CT scan. After I said goodbye to my family and wished my grandmother good luck with the scan, I decided to cook dinner as I was getting hungry and it was already past 5:30 p.m. While I was making dinner, I heard a knock at my back door. I went to the back door and I opened it. Standing outside was a man who looked like he was in his mid-40s, almost 50. He introduced himself as Bob and told me that he moved into the house behind me and that he was recently let out of an insane asylum. This caught me completely off guard. Bob then asked me if I was home alone. Not thinking, I said yes, when I should have said no. But it was kind of hard to say no, as my car was back at home, and I knew I walked from my house to my family's, as I didn't live far from them, and there was clearly no car in the driveway, as Mom and my grandmother left. Bob responded with, "Huh, interesting." Then Bob said, "Well, I won't hold up any of your time. I just wanted to introduce myself like a good neighbor should." I awkwardly smiled and said, "Well, thanks for stopping by." Bob then left, and I went back to having dinner. After I finished dinner, I texted my boyfriend, who was at home with our dog, and I told him about Bob. My boyfriend found that oddly suspicious, but he also told me not to worry about it too much. I agreed with him, and I figured Bob would leave me alone. Everything was quiet for the most of the evening until that night I woke up to the sound of a shovel, and it sounded like someone was digging the ground. I said to myself, who in the hell is up shoveling at 12 at night? I peeked out of my blinds, and there was Bob in the backyard digging. I don't know if he could tell that I opened my window blinds, but he did turn and looked in my direction. I shut the blinds fast and I jumped back into bed. "I really hope he didn't see me," I said. I started to shake as I was scared. Then 2 minutes later, there was a bang against my window. I stayed put in bed, but there was another bang against my window, then stopped for the rest of the night. I woke up the next morning and saw a couple of rocks on the ground that were thrown at my window last night. The rocks didn't look big nor heavy as they didn't break my window. Then all of a sudden, a voice spoke up and said, "Hi." I jumped and saw Bob standing by his fence. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to startle you, but I couldn't help that you peeked out of your window last night. Did I wake you up or something?" he asked. I was in complete shock, but the only thing I could do was make up a lie by saying, "Oh, you were outside? I didn't even notice. I just heard a noise, but I figured it was raccoons or something." Bob said, "You must have heard me. I was out here last night dealing with some weeds. I'm just trying to clean up my property," he said. While he was talking to me, I noticed there was blood on his hands, and I started to smell something gross off of him. I then told Bob that I had to make an important phone call. I only made up an excuse as I clearly didn't want to be around him. But then he shouted at me, "You're going to call the cops?" My body went into panic mode. In a shaky voice, I said, "No, sir." Bob then said, "I'm sorry. I scared you. I didn't mean to scream at you. I have a mental disorder and I tend to outburst at people. I'm really sorry," he said. "I hope you have a good rest of your day." Bob then walked away. I went back into the house, then the phone rang. I checked caller ID and it came up Mom. I sighed in relief and I picked up the phone and talked to Mom. Mom gave me updates on my grandmother's CT scan. I wanted to tell Mom what was going on, but I didn't want to put too much worry on her as she had enough to deal with. I texted my boyfriend and told him everything. He was pretty upset that Bob yelled at me for no reason, but he is starting to get very concerned about my new neighbor. He suggested I tell my family when they get back about Bob so they can keep a close eye on him. My boyfriend then called me to help calm down. After we got off call, I decided to watch a movie. After the movie ended, I took a shower and got ready for bed. I was fast asleep until I was woken up again to the sound of someone digging the ground. It's him, I said. Bob is doing it again. I peeked out my window and I saw something that still shakes me out to this day. Bob was carrying what looked like to be a body. I couldn't tell what body it was. Then I saw him carrying another body. This one looked like to be a female. I felt so sick to my stomach just thinking he could be burying bodies in his backyard. Bob stood up, but I quickly closed the blinds and hopped back into bed, but I couldn't sleep. I was thinking about calling the police when all of a sudden the phone rang. I didn't know whether to answer the phone or not. I went to check caller ID and it said unknown number. I answered and said hello. Peeking out your window again? It was Bob's voice. I was about I was about to answer when Bob asked, "What do you know?" I had to play dumb because I didn't want Bob to think I was onto him. I said, "I don't know what you're talking about, sir." Bob said, "Don't lie." "Sir, I'm not lying," I said. Bob screamed at me saying, "You're next, you nosy little bitch." Then he slammed the phone down. That was when I took action and called 911. I explained everything to the operator. While I was on the phone with the operator, there was a bang on the back of my door. I screamed to the operator, "Help! Help! Bob is banging on the back of the door." The operator told me to hide in an interior room and for me to wait until the police arrived. I did as such. I waited in the closet in my grandmother for about an hour while Bob was banging at my back door and screaming insane words. Then moments later, I heard the sound of police sirens. This was the time I ran out of the closet and ran downstairs. There was a gently knock on my door and a voice saying police. I opened the door and saw Bob in handcuffs. I gave the police details on what I witnessed while four other cops looked around Bob's backyard. The cops found two dead bodies, one being a female and one being a child, a little boy. The cops also found a bag that was covered in dirt and the bag was filled with blood. But there was also something in the bag with the blood and it looked like it was floating. The cops took Bob to the police car. Once Bob was in the back of the police car, Bob gave me this death stare. That stare sent chills down my spine. The police called my mom and my grandmother and explained what happened. I called my boyfriend and he spent the night at my mom's house with me. The next morning, both my mom and my grandmother returned home and they were completely shocked. But they were glad that my boyfriend stayed with me that night to make sure I was okay. I then went home after I said goodbye to my family and chilled on the couch with my boyfriend. Later, breaking news went on TV, and there was Bob. He was arrested for the murder of his wife and his 7-year-old son. He also had criminal charges in the past, such as hitting and screaming at a 19-year-old female who happens to be walking back to her college dorm after she left the campus. I don't know what will happen to Bob now, but I just hope he gets locked up in prison for good. Whoever ran that mental hospital was obviously stupid to let that crazy man out. I never thought I'd come here and write this out, but my therapist did recommend I write this out. It's now 2024, and I'm still with the man who was my boyfriend as he's now my husband. My mom is still alive, but sadly my grandmother isn't, as she passed away in 2014. I still think about her a lot, and I always bet she's watching me from above. And I'm sure if she were here to this day, as I write out my horror experience, she would have been so proud of me. To this day, I still don't know where Bob is, as I don't hear much of him anymore. But all I know is that he got what he deserved.